What are the common mistakes that people make when they're trying to build their butt? Let's check.
Don't you want to look good naked?
So one of the common mistakes that I see when training glutes is too wide of a stance when you're performing things like squats or deadlifts. And traditionally, I feel like people have heard that you're supposed to have a wider stance when you're training your glutes. However, when we look at glute anatomy and we actually look at how our glutes are basically positioned around our pelvis, our glutes use our pelvis as sort of a pivoting point. So thinking more so about a little bit of a narrower shoulder width stance for when you're doing your squats or your RDLs or even your leg presses is probably gonna be better. Another mistake that's pretty common is adding booty bands onto everything. So if you're adding bands around your knees when you're doing squats and hip thrusts, it can be a great teaching tool. I don't know if I want to say great. It can be a good teaching tool for some, but if you're having bands around your knees for everything that you're doing, it can actually take away from some of the movement that you're trying to get out of your glutes and some of the tension that you're trying to build, which is very, very important for growing your butt. You want to create as much tension in your glutes as possible. In my opinion, I feel like it's adding a little bit too much to your brain and your nervous system to think about. So I kind of think about it as, if you're trying to do extension with your hips, right? We know that the glute max primarily does leg extension. So if you're doing a hip thrust or you're doing a squat, you're extending at your hips to come up. If you're adding a band around your knees to push out against, then that is that abduction, right? You're pushing out against the band. So you're basically telling your brain and your nervous system to try to do all these different things at once. And so it could be taken away a little bit from that main movement that we want, which is the hip extension. So I kind of think about this as, if someone tells you to rub your belly and tap your head at the same time, you're trying to, I guess I'm doing it, but it's kind of hard and you have to really think about it. So when we're talking about putting booty bands around squats and hip thrusts and all that, it can just add a little bit too much confusion within your nervous system and within your brain, really. So another mistake I see is not using enough weight or load when you're performing glute movements. So for example, opting for a banded glute kickback over a barbell hip thrust, right? So not that the banded glute kickback is a bad option or a wrong option, it's going to be harder to load that movement with enough weight to create enough tension within your glutes to make them grow. So movements like barbell hip thrusts or barbell glute bridges or squats or leg presses, split squats even, there's tons of different movements that you can utilize to add load to and to continue to add load over time, because that's what's important, versus choosing movements where, for example, booty band movements or band movements where you might feel a lot of kind of sensation or tingling or burn within those movements. Like if you put a booty band around your knees and you do 100 hip thrusts with the booty band, you're gonna feel some sensation within your glutes, but you can only load that up so much, and it's going to take away from the main part of what we're trying to do with building our glutes, which is creating a lot of tension within that muscle. That tension is created by taking the glutes through its full range of motion, but also focusing on loadability. What we know is that in order to create as much tension in your muscles as possible, the movements that are more of the stretchers are going to create that tension a lot more, not a lot more, but significantly more over the long term versus the movements that are the squeezers, which are more of those sensation movements. So the reason why we want to pay attention to this is because within those squeezers or those movements that you might feel a lot of sensation, so the booty band exercises, monster walks, maybe those frog pumps where you are in a frog position and you're got the dumbbell on your hips and you're doing this pumpy thing, you might feel a lot of burn and sensation within that movement. However, it's really hard for some people to tell the difference between feeling that sensation within the muscle versus it maybe being your joints that are kind of screaming back at you and giving you a sensation that says, hey, this is a weird position. Why are you putting me here? And it feels weird. And so it feels like sensation, but are you actually working that target muscle in the most efficient way possible? Or are you kind of jamming your joints so that it's not gonna be a good situation down the line. So another mistake I see is not focusing on the main movements to build your glute max. And when I say main movements, I mean the movements that are primarily the hip extension movements that you can load up. So when we're trying to build our butt, we wanna focus primarily on that glute maximus, and then also incorporate other movements that will train our glute medius and our glute minimus, which are the other two smaller muscles. Talking about some of those movements with the glute max, to focus on hip extension, those are gonna be your barbell, glute bridges, and hip thrusts. Those are gonna be things like leg presses, squats, RDLs, that stretching movement where you're stretching your glutes. And then adding in other movements for your glute medius and glute minimus, particularly kickbacks, like cable kickbacks for your glute medius, which would be more so in that 30-degree angle back, and your glute minimus, which would be more so your leg coming straight out to the side. So those are great to incorporate, but if you don't have the main movements that are creating as much tension in that glute max, which are gonna be those hip extension movements, then probably need to rethink your programming a little bit. The last, but definitely not least, mistake that I see with building glutes is not eating enough food. So if you want to build muscle in general, especially in your glutes, you have to eat enough food in order to grow. If you are constantly restricting, if you're constantly on a diet, if you're constantly in a calorie deficit, you're not giving your body enough fuel to be able to grow. Your body does not want to put on muscle. That is not what its main priority is. Its main priority is to survive and do whatever it can to survive. So if you are not feeding it enough, if you're not fueling appropriately, if you're not eating enough protein, it's not gonna wanna build muscle, right? Because that is a luxury. Building muscle is a luxury. So if you wanna build your butt, if you wanna grow your butt to its greatest capacity, eat some damn food. Women, we believe